Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. I am honored to have Christopher Zelov, a filmmaker who's done several films inspired by Bucky. This is a Bucky-inspired series that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. This is a brainchild of CJ Fearnly, and I am just honored to have Christopher here. Welcome, Christopher.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
All right, Christopher, so tell us about yourself. I mean, instead of reading your bio, I want to hear it from you directly.
Well, what version do you want?
The long one.
Well, I'm a native of the Delaware Valley. 63 years old now. Graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School of Business. Although I'm more inspired by design than business. I missed Bucky when he was there, but I did encounter him at Cody's bookstore in Berkeley in 1982, approximately. And he was the tour guide of the film Ecological Design. So my first project out of college was in educational software. And then it led to film, and then it led to design, and then it led to eco-development. But I've primarily been a filmmaker for 30 years now.
Wow. So I want to ask along two lines now. One about
Done a few books too, by the way.
Wonderful. So we'll start with your encounter with Bucky first. So tell us about Bucky and you.
Well, he was at Penn the same time I was, but I didn't know who he was. I think Critical Path had just come out. But I think the summer of '82, I encountered him at Cody's Books in Berkeley when he was talking about when he was talking about Critical Path. And the seed was probably planted then for me to explore further. It wasn't until about 1990 when I met my filmmaking partner, Brian Danitz, in the elevator of NYU Film School. And I was carrying a copy of Critical Path, and we opened up a conversation that led to making of the film that we really committed to the journey of making a film we originally were going to call Into the Fuller Universe. But the family, of course, thought they owned the name Fuller, and we didn't want to argue with them. And there was a competing film being made that came out around the time Ecological Design came out. I can't remember the name of it, but Masterworks, I think, was some of the people involved. And so anyway, it was a fortuitous event. And so it became more about ecological design and inventing the future. And we could only do 10% Bucky, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. They later wished we had done more, but it was a kind of sign from the universe that it was really more about Bucky's ideas and where they had meandered and found new form. And Bucky was kind of an underlying tour guide. So
wonderful.
The film came out in '95.
So talk a little bit about the film.
Well, I did find an essay that I wrote during the 20th anniversary that I'll put up on the chat. Mm-hmm. One of the things that stood out about the film is the essay in Design Outlaws, re-looking at it, was called Finding Synchronicity's Trail. And I look back and we were just blessed with doors opening and amazing things happening when we made the film that I haven't felt since then. It was like the name Buckminster Fuller opened up all these conceptual doors. And the story unfolded organically. I like to call it heuristic filmmaking. Filmmaking as a tool for discovery. And Bucky definitely was the underlying influence. And at some level, maybe he was guiding us. I don't know. That's another story. But the film really is about the beginning of the century to the end of the century and speculating on the 21st century. And we were kind of ahead of the curve on sustainability. In fact, we didn't even use that word. We used the word ecological design, inventing the future. There were 5 different chapters and a companion book called Design Outlaws on the Ecological Frontier. And one of the chapters is Design Outlaws. We celebrated the Design Outlaws.
What did you mean by design outlaws?
Well, that's a notion that came from Bucky, actually, that all human innovation comes in the outlaw realm. And it was published in the Whole Earth Catalog. I should say we had a Whole Earth Catalog approach to filmmaking, which is learning by doing. We had gone to film school, but this was our first film. And so it was I don't want to say a punk approach, but you could say that. It was definitely outside of Hollywood. And it was really, I like to call it edumentary approach. We had a lot of ideas that we had synthesized. And so it was a unique narrative that unfolded. As I said in the essay, which I'll put on the chat, the world we think we lived in was not the world we actually lived in. That's one power of filmmaking. And we definitely were opening up conceptual doors beyond the conventional approach to design and architecture, which now we all think is normal. Sustainability, regenerative design, which of course came from Bucky. It's now become a movement. But back in the early 90s, it was not that way. And it was really an archaeology of the mind to find characters like J. Baldwin, George Brand, Jaime Lerner, John Todd. So that's where synchronicity came in.
Wonderful. So folks, what we're going to do is that I'm going to talk to Christopher about his work. And then Christopher is going to show, we're going to see a number of clips from his work. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So please keep track of all the questions that you have for Christopher, or I would love any comments on anything that is being said. There'll be plenty of time for that. Let me ask you one thing. This is the first time I'm talking to a filmmaker. What is the power of film? What can film bring to a topic? Like there is this, this entire constellation of ideas that Bucky has. What is the medium of film and what can it do for people?
Well, as one French writer talked about, it's about making the invisible visible, number one. Number two, it's about storytelling. And number three, it ought to be about inspiring you to see a new world. Number four, it's a language. So it's a different way of connecting ideas. That's what I love about it. And so you take people on a journey. And
yeah, no, it's a amazingly powerful medium, because if you look at the other arts like literature or music or visual arts, this one brings all of them together and creates this, because it engages your mind, your emotions, your sense of story, all of it together, and it just absorbs all your senses. It's a very, very powerful medium.
At its best, I
Yes,
would say most of the films that come out are not about ideas,
yes.
not transformational. I was always influenced by transformational film that takes you from one place and takes you to a new place and gives you a new vision of the world.
No,
So
absolutely. I mean, I think
that's about 10% of our films, if we're lucky, coming out of Hollywood, maybe less.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. Mostly the medium has been wasted because it is focused on just entertainment, of just making people feel something right now, and
Yeah.
not really doing anything beyond that. So wonderful. So what was your next project after this?
Well, I did a film with Ian McHarg, who was the founder of the landscape architecture program at Penn. And that was called Some Songs to the Stars, which was his biospheric poetry. It turned out to be the last thing that he did, because he died around 2000. He was influenced by Fuller, but he was a landscape architect. Some of you may know him for his book Design with Nature. And he was in the academic world, but he was an inventor of a whole model of landscape planning, actually. So that was kind of fun. It was biospheric poetry with music by Annie Haslam and David Darling.
Mhm.
So that was came out after Design Outlaws. That came out around 2000, 2001,
Mhm.
I recall. Yeah.
What are the next projects?
Well, the next big project was called City 21,
Mhm.
Multiple Perspectives on Urban Futures. And that featured city planning, asking the question, what can we learn from the eco village movement? And what are some of the emerging perspectives on the future of the city? And that came out 2007, approximately 2008. Played on PBS, and there was a book that came out with it called City 21, The Search for the Second Enlightenment.
Wow.
So I have some clips on that we can show, I think.
Absolutely.
That features Stuart Brand from the first film. And
Should we start playing the scripts, playing the clips? Would you like to play a clip now, or would you like to
well,
wait till the?
I do want to say that filmmaking as a learning journey
Mhm.
is another framework. We're talking about framework, and film is all about building frameworks that take people places. So that's back to this heuristic filmmaking. Another way of framing it is a learning journey. So we didn't come at it with a fixed script, which is a lot of what this culture does now. We're more scripted than ever before. I tend to find people with their cell phones in front of them, and then just dealing with the corporatocracy,
Mhm.
which I think Terrence McKenna coined. But they're just hitting you with scripts over and over again. It's almost impossible to get a real conversation anymore, except for places like this, perhaps.
Mhm.
That's the downside of the information age. And in film, generally, the scripting process is so thick that it's more difficult to get new insights than ever before. You really got to hunt for it. But that's a whole approach to filmmaking that I took and our team took, which I think is still refreshing. some people call it the discovery method
Mhm.
of creativity, which I find is another good way to frame it. Meaning you don't have it all planned out what you're going to do. You discover what is real by the process of making it. And that
Wonderful.
always comes up with something new.
Wow.
And that might be influenced by Bucky as well.
Let me do one thing. Let me ask you just about two things, then we can play clips and then we can go back to the conversation. So two things I want to ask you about is one is about your joint project with CJ. The Philadelphia Eco District project. Could you talk a little bit about that and your association with CJ Fearnly?
Well, I met CJ back in the early 90s at a cafe Kairos project that I was doing in Philadelphia. I didn't really meet him there. He was just there. I didn't know who he was. Then I met him again through the Buckminster Fuller Institute. And I think it was an event at the RISD event. I was doing a film on Magnus, who was a model maker. And then I met him again in Philadelphia, and I was doing this eco district project with the University of the Arts. And it was a studio, and the studio had come to an end. And somehow I got into a conversation with CJ, and he offered to be part of the new version of the eco district. You know how CJ was, very giving and very generous. So he was like the key collaborator to revise that. I think it was 2016 through 2000, just about when COVID hit, that we ran that project. Now it's called Eco Design Incubator. It's more of an incubator than a eco district. That's because we found that the district concept wasn't working in Philadelphia. So it's more of a global idea now.
Wonderful.
And CJ, of course, was very generous and a great collaborator, one of the better ones that I've encountered. He didn't have the ego and I'm the artist kind of attitude that I've encountered so many times in the film business. Don't you know who I am? CJ was beyond that.
Yes.
And there's a website that's still up called ecodistrictphiladelphia.org that still has his imprint.
Yes.
And I certainly miss him and miss the qualities of mine that were so rare, unfortunately.
Yes. Yes. No, I also feel the same way about collaboration with CJ. And you're talking about the attitude that many of these folks have of saying, don't you know who I am? CJ came with the attitude, I want to know who you are. And
Right.
he had that attitude towards everybody. So, and he just invited so much collaboration, so much creativity from so many people, just
Right.
amazing. So I'll ask you one more question, then we'll go to the clips, and then I want to give a chance for everybody to ask you questions. There's amazing group of people here, so I would want to do a kind of a back and forth conversation. So the last question for you is, what are you working on? What are your future projects?
Well, I always got a few films going. I got a film on design futures in front of me right now. You can't see it. Subtitled maybe Design Alchemy, or maybe The Future of Design. It's an hour-long film. I'm looking to affiliate with a university to take it to the next level. I'm also working on some courseware, which is called Inventing Eco Futures. It's a compilation of my 30 years in the film world. I'm trying to reinvent film and actually get it to students in a way that they can learn rather than just watch it for an hour or 2 hours and go away and maybe not have a follow-up. Then I'm working with a company called Green Tech Nations Network. And I'm doing a film on an inventor named by the name of Virgil Perryman, who was an inventor, African American, Native American, living in Abu Dhabi, who's invented a parabolic tracker, a thermal battery, and a couple other things. So it's more about his work.
Wonderful.
So
All
they're
right.
the main project.
Wonderful. I want to leave enough time for people to ask you questions, because there are a lot of people who know actually your work much better than I do. So, I want everybody to be able to kind of comment, ask you questions, go from there. But first, let us do some clips. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Let me see here, share sound.
We got the first one.
Yes.
Dream.
Shall I go ahead and play it?
Yeah, this is from Eco Design. Features John Todd and Bucky in a very creative position. Yes.
Ecological design and ecological engineering is about as radical a discipline as you can get. Because what it says at the very outset is that human beings are going to be partners with other life forms.
To achieve a world of true partnership with nature, biochemist John Todd's rule of thumb is replace, wherever possible, machines with resilient living systems.
It's possible, using ecological engineering, to create living machines that will generate the fuels we need in the future, that will transform our waste, to culture our foods, that will regulate our climates, and which will integrate our buildings with the larger world. So what is a living machine? How is it designed? What's it look like? It has engineering components, it has materials components, and it has living components. And they all are completely integrated.
In a living machine, the waste of one biological community becomes the food of the next. This living machine at Providence, Rhode Island, purifies the wastewater of 150 families without the use of toxic chemicals or of conventional machinery. The chain of linked ecosystems progressively consumes the toxins in the sewage until the water is 5 times cleaner than by conventional means. As on Earth, it is the rich diversity of life which ensures the health and resiliency of the system.
And one of the things that we find about designing these systems is that we can't know a fraction of what they know. That's why I call it a true partnership. I mean, they know more than we do. Say the organisms for waste treatment. When you set up the living machine, you don't know which organisms will recombine in the presence of the waste. So you get thousands of species of organisms from all kinds of different aquatic environments, and you seed them, preferably every season or 4 times a year, and they begin to recombine in ways to adapt to your waste. It can be as deadly as hell. They'll figure it out. You can't. But you must honor the system by making sure the cast of characters is there. So the design process is one that is in part taken place in the wild and brought into this new domestic, if you will, environment. The other aspect of all of this is the materials. 90% of our thinking is what I call gossamer engineering. And this is the kind of thing that Bucky thought a lot about. Membranes, intelligent membranes. And by intelligent, I mean able to change their properties so that they are one state when the internal state inside the machine is one way, and they're another state when the external is the other way. And one of the beautiful things about using ecology as a model is this concept of balance, this concept of all kinds of strange things that technologists don't think about. Pulses, day and night, season, cold, warm. How do you design all these things in so that they dance with each other?
In 1982, John Todd collaborated with Jay Baldwin in the construction of a living machine within a geodesic pillow dome. With his biological approach, John Todd had achieved Buckminster Fuller's dream, a self-sufficient shelter, a house with its own metabolism.
When Bucky opened it, it was quite an experience because here was this tiny little structure. It was only 30 feet in diameter. And he completely understood what we were doing. That it was heating and cooling itself, that it was providing sustenance, that it was providing this deeply almost spiritual feeling it had. And Bucky walked into it, and as you know, it was very close to the end of his life. And he said, "This is a dream of mine fulfilled. This is the stuff of my dream stuff fulfilled." The integration of nature and architecture, the missing link.
Wow. Wow.
The missing link, good one.
Amazing. Christopher, would you like to talk a little bit about this, or shall we just go to the next one and play all the clips?
Well, that was the perhaps the emotional peak of the film. Bucky's dream, stuff of my dream stuff. That was Jay Baldwin and John Todd. Jay Baldwin became a mentor of mine. The late Jay Baldwin. I hope everybody knows about his work. He was one of the best Bucky influenced characters that I ever met. He was famous for the Whole Earth catalog, of course. He was a collaborator with Stuart Brand. And the pillar dome technology was since used on the Eden Project in England, if you know about that important project, the pillar dome technology. But yeah, and of course, living machines are still important technology, and there's a whole story to go in deeper on that. In fact, one of the projects I'm working with on is called the bioremediation barge, which is using living machines to clean rivers. So there's still frontiers with that technology. And, you know, nature and architecture now is going through a marriage at a high level. Finally, the LEED system came out in '95, Living Building Challenge, maybe 2014 or something. And so it's now become very popular. I don't know how many of those people reference Bucky's work, but it's certainly, he was one of the pioneers. And the film kind of traces that.
Thank you. Folks, you're welcome to comment on this. You know, once we're done with all the clips, we'll have plenty of time to talk about all these amazing, you know, this is just very, very deep film. I really, really love the clip. All right, which one shall we do next?
Stuff beyond design outlaws, which I'll talk about.
We are in a world that we don't understand anymore. We looked back to the myth and the metaphor of the Enlightenment. Part of our new myth was, well, we're in exactly the same position. The old rules no longer seem to apply, the new rules haven't been discovered. What we need is a second Enlightenment.
Thank you. All right, let's see here. Let me go back. Would you like to talk a little bit about this? Christopher, are you there? Okay, looks like there is a problem with Christopher's video. I think he will, let me see here. Let's see. Okay, he should be back in a couple of minutes. So folks, go ahead and take, keep your questions ready, both about, filmmaking. Give me just a second. Let me go ahead and set things up here. All right. Christopher, can you hear us? Christopher, are you back? Just a second. There he is. Okay.
Were you able to play the whole clip?
Yes, I played the whole clip. Would you like to comment on it?
Well, so this is getting into the Beyond Design Outlaws theme, which was more about, that was more focused of ecological design. Maybe we can play that next, Design Outlaws, but this was more about the recursive wheel. So after becoming a design outlaw, eventually you got to bring the ideas into the culture, and that's becoming a design in-law. Which is,
Wonderful.
yeah.
I like the in-law and outlaw. Thank you.
Right. Second Enlightenment, of course, is
Yes.
one of the themes. So it involves a number of aspects, including a long now perspective, including a transpersonal perspective, including a humanistic city development perspective. So we labeled the companion book "The Search for the Second Enlightenment."
Mm-hmm.
Of course, is riffing off the First Enlightenment that happened in Scotland. And we live in a world we don't understand anymore. That's pretty accurate.
Very good. What is the next clip?
Well, why don't you play Design Outlaws, since we're still playing with that idea?
I didn't get the outlaw. Like I tried outlaw.
Now, Design Outlaws, just design first.
Okay. Nope.
No?
Could be another. Could it be another name?
Of course. You don't see it under design.
No, it's not showing up under design outlaw. Let me see. Shall we look at this videos here? Let's see. If there is any other clip, let me just see here. How many clips are here? Okay, let's see here. Design.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch more that.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
So I don't think there is a clip named Design Outlaw. I couldn't find it. Is there?
Why don't you play Galactic Explorer perspective then?
Okay.
I mean, I have it on my computer. We could play it, but
Okay, let's try Galactic Explorer.
this is a perspective that came out of
Designers
Eco Design.
try to make desirable devices that serve individuals and societies' needs. I keep pushing people to try to view those needs and the goal of the designs a little more broadly. Technology in perspective and under control is a way to describe it. A way of looking at some of these broader issues is to pretend you're a galactic explorer that comes and visits the Earth every 100,000 years or every million years. It helps you get away from the human priority that we put on everything. it makes you think a bit more about the rest of the species, realize that humans are just one newly arrived species. Say they do some paleontological digs 10,000 years from now, they will certainly encounter two layers. One's the layer under the earth that represents the great extinction, the end of the age of the dinosaurs. Another layer is the layer that we are right in the midst of, will certainly be just as distinct, the layer where we will have consumed all the fossil fuel that was readily available. Maybe there'll be some nuclear debris seen. I don't know what they'll see. All I know is they will see a layer of great distinctness, and that's what we're in the middle of. You see this as you take the galactic point of view.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on this?
Well, that's the late great Paul McCready, who invented the GM impact, which should have transformed the world back in the 90s. But GM killed that project off, and we had to wait for Tesla 10, 15 years later. But Paul McCready was one of the great inventors of his time. And Gossamer Engineering is one of his great invention or great approaches, and AeroVironment is the company still going on after his passing. They make some pretty good drones too, by the way, which may or may not be a good use of the living reapproach to technology, but certainly topical. So once again, you know, these inventions were hinted at and were coming up in the 90s, and well, now we have Teslas all around the world. But McCready was the real, or one of the first inventors of the mass-produced electric car. There's a film about who killed the impact that's worth seeing, and who killed it, the corporatocracy. And thank God for people like Elon Musk, who is a new generation of design outlaw that was able to bring forth that invention. He, of course, is controversial. We won't get into his character, though.
Wonderful. What would you like to show next?
I want you to show the trailer for education, sorry. Should be up on the page there. The trailer
Give me
for
just a second here.
education.
Hold
I think
on.
I saw it.
I've kind of lost. Give me just a second. Sometimes this happens with Zoom. I need to play around with it to get this sharing again. Give me a second. Okay, there it is. Share. Okay. Sorry, can you repeat, please?
Trailer, put the word trailer in there. ER,
Oh, ER, sorry. Trailer, yes.
there it is.
The first one?
That's it.
Okay.
There'll be sound.
Actually, the most interesting art of any kind, in almost any form, is hybrid.
Why is this important? Because when you think about 21st century learning skills, you look at the words: leadership, collaboration, creativity.
Someday, baby, when the river runs free, it's gonna carry that water.
There's a symbiosis in nature, and there's a symbiosis in the computer system, so they're a lot alike. So I always advise young people kind of, if you're going to sort of invent with new architecture, you should be doing invisible architecture if you really want to know what's progressive.
We've had really tricky projects where we've worked in communities where all communication, sometimes between blacks and whites, have shut down, sometimes between Irish kids and Puerto Rican kids, sometimes between a methadone clinic and a community that didn't want the clinic there. You know, we've had at times projects that have stirred up tremendous acrimony and have been, you know, there's been a divisive thing going on in the community that we've had to deal with, and I feel like that's okay. We welcome that challenge. Because I think if you're not walking in territory that's complex, then you're not really doing your job.
Something that systems people say, you know, if you can create that node where you're always learning sideways, learning vertically, learning this way, learning that way.
To me, the primary problem with design education is it has become this packaged deal that you learn all this stuff and you go out in the world and do it. And it's a theme and variation as opposed to conceptual thinking. So that would be my critique in a summary. I don't know if it's going to make a summary of the thing.
Design is a process of failing over and over and over and then getting it right.
I think design intelligence begins by breaking down those walls to understand how things are oriented in a 3 or 4 dimensional world that we live in which there are no disciplines, there are no boundaries. And most of the world we now understand is kind of a flow. The question depends on the time scale one sees.
Really, that's where the sustainability area really is. It's always on the edge. It's always between things. And you've got to actually be able to weave that all together continuously. Otherwise, you're not going to get to that next level.
Wow. Wonderful. All right. Would you like to say something about this, please?
Well, I'm obviously playing with different titles: Future of Design Education, Design Alchemy, and Design Futures. So it's a work in progress, although I have an hour-long version right in front of me, and I'm looking for collaboration for finishing it and a university to work with. Because once again, the challenge is reaching the young people, the upcoming generation, and they got to carry the torch. And there's all this knowledge now that is available, and how can we make it available in a way that is transformational and perhaps outside of the conventional school system, which I'm not a big fan of. So that's another, back to the discovery method versus education as filling a bucket, which is a lot of what they like to do and overcharge for it too. So I haven't really found a design school that I like. That's pretty sad. And I've visited a lot of them and was connected with Penn Design, and that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. All right. Would you like to show any more clips or shall we go to the questions?
Well, there's a whole bunch more to show, but let's take some questions now.
Let's take some questions. So folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark to comment on anything that you have heard or ask any questions, or you can raise your hand in Zoom, whatever you prefer. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to ask questions or make any comments. We're going to start with Kirby. Kirby, go ahead.
Well, what I'm kind of curious about is if somebody does want to include Bucky stuff, I always call it Bucky stuff.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to include Bucky stuff in a movie, do you feel like there's a stash of clips, kind of like there's Getty Images, or do you have a library? Kurt here on the call and myself, we've talked a lot to Noel Murphy, another filmmaker, and he has apparently a very large stash of very interesting Bucky related clips. And you have some too, but when you start a new movie, say you had a budget that was going to be 90% Bucky and only 10% not Bucky, do you feel you have good access to a whole bunch of clips, or do you have to scrounge around and it's really hard? That's my question.
Well, it was hard back in the 90s because it was hermetically sealed in Los Angeles, where the Fuller Institute was located. And you had to pass through all kinds of hoops to get to the footage. Now, of course, it's more available through the digital world. But if you're going to make a commercial film, the family is going to want to have some influence. And they believe they own the name Fuller. Maybe that's changed, but you just can't make a film about Bucky Fuller and commercialize it without getting their permission. And the Buckminster Fuller Institute probably will send a lawyer after you. But of course, you can make clips available randomly, but as soon as you get into commercializing, it becomes a different ballgame. So I guess the answer is yes and no. But digitally now there's more material available than ever before. If you were going to teach a course at an academic institution or independently, maybe they wouldn't bother you. But we made that film as a
just to follow up,
yeah.
Where I'm coming from, some of these people have seen my presentation on Bucky. I'm very much into the geometry, almost like abstract away everything that most people would consider interesting and just leaving the bare bones geometry. And that's a budget there. There's computer graphics involved that could be more or less well done. And what frustrates me is some of the people who I've seen do the best pure geometry that looks like Bucky's geometry, they're also mixing it up with all kinds of stuff I don't want to mix it up with, like UFOs and stuff. Bucky, whatever you think about UFOs, Bucky was not big into that. It's not in his books and stuff. So when I do a movie, if I were to do a movie about Bucky and get his geometry in there, I feel like I could create that geometry from scratch, those geometry cartoons, without running up against the estate or the family, because geometry is geometry. Anybody could do it.
Right.
So that's not the obstacle there, but the obstacle is it takes money and it takes resources. And most people aren't fluent enough with Fuller's geometry to know there's anything really worth doing there. And I think that I don't know, I just am kind of a missionary for let's do more computer stuff. Not exclusively, like not to eliminate all the great stuff that's not computer stuff, but mix in more of it is what I want to see.
Right. We did some animated geometry. Howard Perlmutter was the guy that worked on it. You might want to search him out in Texas. So yeah, it can be done. They'll probably green light it if it's about geometry. You just have to ask permission. on the Fuller family. That's all I'm saying. Maybe not. Just be aware that in filmmaking, there's a lot of people who want to get a piece of the action. I can help you.
Thank you. All right. Next up is going to be Joe. Folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark to make any comments on any of the clips or anything that Christopher has talked about, any of the projects, or to ask questions. Joe is next.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Chris. Thank you for the evening, spending the time with us. One of the questions I have is you actually talked about, the importance of storytelling in this process and putting together these movies. And I was wondering, you said that it's kind of like you're discovering something each time. Like there's a discovery process that goes on within the storytelling process. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, because sometimes like when I think about telling a story, you have an idea where it's going to go, but just expand on the idea that how discovery works into storytelling.
Well, there's a great quote by Rumi that I like. What you're seeking is seeking you. So a story will seek you if you're asking the right questions. It's also back to the famous line from The Search for the Holy Grail. To whom does the Grail serve? Is the question. And the answer, of course, is the person on a quest, the person asking the question. And so it really comes out of the kind of questions that you're asking. How big are they and how dynamic are they? And all kinds of things will come to you based on your questioning, your inquiry. Of course, it helps to have a background in comparative mythology, knowing about Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell and Bucky did work together, by the way. This idea of Indra's net was one of the themes that they connected with. Everywhere there's a connection, there's a light. Very much connected, very much related to the geodesic dome. Indra's net is a mythology out of Hinduism that Joseph Campbell picked up on. So there's a connection of mythology and technology. And it also comes back to collaboration. You can't make a film by yourself. I had key collaborators, Ryan Danitz, Phil Cousineau, who is a mythologist, studied under Joseph Campbell. So that, you need at least 3 people to make a film, as I like to say, and maybe more. The more the better, actually, up to a point. So you're bringing in different perspectives. The story will surprise you of what unfolds. Like as I said, for City 21 is what can we learn from the Eco Village movement, and what are some of the perspectives driving the future of the city? They were the 2 heuristic questions, obviously, or heuristic drivers. With the ecological design film, the questions were what influence did Buckminster Fuller have, and what goes beyond Bucky Fuller? Of course, that was related to comprehensive anticipatory design science, which I think CJ picked up on in an original way. Storytelling is something that informs the process, but it's really what animates you is the real issue. What kind of questions animate you? And what, as Jung used to say, what story are you living? What myth are you living? Getting in touch with that is a very important question, as it's changing what myth we're living right now. And it's certainly not the conventional materialist two-car garage suburban dream. I don't think that's the dream anymore, although we all come out of that in some regards. So yeah, there's a lot to that question, Joe. But, once again, following synchronicity's trail, one thing leads to another, and Bucky Fuller leads to Joseph Campbell, which leads to John Todd, which leads to AI, perhaps. So it's connecting the dots in an original way.
Christopher, I want to give you an example from CJ.
Yeah.
CJ, we do these comprehensivist Wednesdays, and he says, and he was very big on getting this multiple perspectives, what we can learn from multiple perspectives. So he said, look, the way in which Aborigines handle maps, navigate in space is really unique. So we need to do something about it. So he talked to Maritza, who's very much interested in learning about indigenous cultures. So Maritza said, yes, I'll do a meetup on that. So she did a meetup on that. And during that time, somebody shows up from Australia who had worked with Aborigines for about 20 years. And he knew so much more than Maritza did or any of us did, that we handed over the meetup to him as soon as the meetup started, and we were able to get this entire richness, to see the entire context. So it's a very good example of saying, okay, I'm discovering this process, and I'm open to what I will, what resources will kind of add up, keep adding to my, to actually manifestation of that quest.
Okay. Well, that's being open to surprise.
Yes, thank you. Next up is going to be Robert, followed by Richard. Robert.
I know of a learning place that's in the early stages of formation, and it's looking for collaboration, and it's called Design Flight School. And you might look into that. If we can make contact, I can work that out for you too. I think there's probably something there that we can share.
Flight, you said?
Design Flight School.
All right, good.
Okay, I want to tell you a little bit about that. When I interviewed CJ, he held up this orange book. I was interviewing him about his own book, and he held up this orange book. I said, why are you holding up this book? 4 times he held up that book. It turned out to be the book called The Design Way by Harold Nelson, who is the one who is starting, who has just launched this design flight school. He actually did 4 meetups with us lately. So I will go ahead and connect Robert and you and Harold up, and you guys can take it from there.
Okay. Some of the stuff that I want to teach is up on ecodistrictphiladelphia.org website. Well, thank you for that, though.
Thank you, Robert. Really appreciate that. I will go ahead and connect you guys up. Next up is going to be Richard.
Yes, thank you. And my question is coming from my background of having been a retired professor of social work at the University of Calgary. And I was really intrigued with what you had to say about the transformation. And I understand it now in what I think you're saying is the transformation in educational systems from ed-ucation to edge-ucation.
Good.
And in the context of the principles of tensegrity and compression and tension, I see that education is probably more focused on what I would call the compression or the entities, and education, as you say, the links between, would be more focused on the tension part and the interconnections. I would appreciate some thoughts about this transformation and how it might be facilitated in a, let's say, a higher education institution like a university, from moving from education to education?
Well, that's of course a big question. Education, as we know it, is an institution with a lot of money and power and prestige behind it. Education is about inventing the future, and unfortunately, it's kind of rare. So you got to look for it, and you know, I like Michael Mead's work, the mythologist, who's saying that we have to move from the hero's journey to developing our inner genius as the focus of education. That we're all born with a genius, and the focus of education should be discovering what our genius is and then being able to bring it to the world. And so much of typical education is learning about what other people think and what the dominant paradigm is, that we sometimes forget about our inner genius. So it's an opposite approach. You know, I think it was Keats or Shelley talked about education is not about filling a bucket, it's about lighting a spark. So how do we light that spark? And I think it's has to do with learning from others who's been on the path as part of it. Developing mentors is crucial. I've been lucky to have 3 or 4 mentors that have transformed my life. And you don't get that out of typical education. Professors don't act as mentors anymore. It's more about relay of knowledge. You know, it's a knowledge industry, not a wisdom industry. Maybe that's the shift, going from a knowledge to a wisdom orientation. And wisdom is really getting into deeper questions like, what am I here to do and what really excites me? As I like to say, ripping off of Peter Senge's work, the 5th discipline, the first question is, you know, in key learning is learning to create what matters. And that's the simple question that you have to ask yourself aspirationally. What do I want to create that matters to me? And if you ask that question every day and keep a journal, you'll get some answers. The second one in his learning model is the power of reflection. What's working, what's not working? What are some strategies for improving? You can do that every day. And the third key learning skill is systems capacity. The ability to understand systems, which I think everybody here who's into Bucky understands that. But the first one's the key, learning to create what matters. And you got to ask that question every day almost, and answers will come to you. And the fact that it's not part of the curriculum is unfortunate. Maybe that's why we have so much bureaucracy and so much scriptedness in this world, because we're not asking those questions. So it's back to the quest for the Holy Grail, which is really getting into the deeper question of what it is. As one of my mentors used to say, what is my mind-blowing vision? That if I could do that, I'd get up every day and be excited. And maybe we've forgotten to ask that question. So yeah, it's lighting that spark, and maybe art schools are the place where they know something about it. I always was thought about that the future of education somewhere between an art school and a scientific laboratory, where we can invent One of the characters in that trailer was a Professor John Belt out of SUNY Oswego. And he had a classroom that was part cafe, part movie theater, part workshop. And he turned it around with students and said, well, what is it that you want to learn? And it was very much a Zen approach. So there are examples out there of how you can come out of the education perspective, but certainly not enough. And it's not the dominant paradigm. And most college professors want to tell you how much they know. And so that's what we're up against. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's
Richard, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah. Well, it's not a follow-up, but it's really just an appreciation of what you have said, because I'm having the opportunity to be involved in redesigning of a undergraduate program, and I'm trying to figure out some ways to encourage them to not redesign the old design into sort of a new expression, but to redesign, as you say, from education to education. So you've given me some really good ideas that I think I'm going to try and slip into the conversation when I get a chance to sit down with the redesigners. Thank you.
Okay. I wrote an essay on the 20th anniversary of the film Ecological Design that I can send you that has some clues there. And of course, this new film, I've been doing research on that for a while. So yeah, you definitely got to break down the dominant paradigm, which certainly needs it. Because I think higher education is pricing itself off the charts. And now with the internet, there's so many different ways you can access learning, but we need mentors. That's not going to go away. So maybe that's where
I'll ask you one question and then we'll go to Zheng, because this is on the top of my mind. You know, when I look at Bucky, he's a very different kind of a man than the kind of people this education system is trying to build. He's a very different kind of a man. What can you learn from comparative mythology and all the wisdom traditions about how you can be and how you should be? What can you get? Like, for example, you know, Joseph Campbell starts with follow your bliss. So what is it that you have learned from comparative mythology and the wisdom tradition that helps you?
Well, the wisdom tradition is obviously very deep. Creation spirituality is another framing for it. If you know Matthew Fox's work and Desjardins' work and Meister Eckhart's work. So there's a spiritual aspect of Christianity that we've lost, rather than the fall and redemption model. It's creation spirituality that we know higher powers to the creative process. So we have to learn to master the creative process. And it's, you know, wisdom tradition, people like Basho, the Zen monk, don't seek to follow the footsteps of the masters of old. Find your own path and follow that. So that's kind of Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss kind of stuff. Develop your inner genius. There's a whole bunch of analogs out there and teachers we can learn from. Emerson has a great quote: a genius is somebody who can light his own fire. So we have to learn to light our own fire. And Bucky certainly had that ability.
Yes.
So
thank you.
There's all kinds of resources for that.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Zheng, followed by John and Yoshimi. Zheng.
Hi. Yes, it's very exciting to come back to join this discussion. I think education is really something and very concerning. And we talk about quite a lot about. I'm actually wondering, recently I have a conversation with my son who's going to college, and I found the public education really has problem because they totally brainwash kids. They are very, they have all very extreme ideas about this socialist idea, but they have no idea how to accomplish it. But anyway, I realize most of society, they don't want to educate independent thinker because they are hard to manage. Every single society, no matter it's capitalism or socialism or communism, I experience, it seems they want conformers, they don't want to teach. And my younger son, who is more like rebelling and was punished in the school, and I not sent him to a choice school, which is much better. But anyway, I think also talking about sustainability, I realized that capitalism, the whole idea is against sustainability, because the best way to be sustainable is not overly consumed. But capitalism, they have to keep producing all this useless thing, like they have to upgrade your computer, upgrade everything, which is pointless. There's no point to even do all that. But in order to keep the machine running, it's totally waste. And this whole sustainable, I'm architect, sustainable itself become this commercialized, overpricing stuff. We toured this house, it was green building, living wall, all this stuff. And it's super expensive. And only a few rich people can afford it. And this is not real sustainable. Why you need a living wall on your kitchen when you have something naturally in the gardens, way cheaper. And the whole irrigation system take a long time to inspect, super expensive. And I don't think it worked well to grow vertically for the plants anyway. But I think this whole idea is like, I think that's maybe the Buckminster Fuller wasn't popular because his whole idea is against this capitalism system. And I actually had discussion with architecture group because I never heard of him. Even I come to graduate school here to study. I studied bachelor in China. And then we actually end up has heated discussion in architecture group in Seattle. And then some people knows him, I realized. But most people know him only about geodome, like hardly anything. They see him more like engineer. So it's like, oh my God, I had know all these people know him more than the architecture community. It's quite ironic. But yeah, so, and he has no impact in at least the sustainable we discuss in architecture school or community or AIA group, which is quite unfortunate because I heard your movie this is a real sustainable. It's not like the commercialized, like you have to have all these points to get your planting, your, like different level of green building, which you have to pay to get a certificate, you have to pay people to inspect. Everything in here, it become commercialized. Every single thing, no matter good or bad. They're not like become totally different animal.
Yeah, I hear you. So what's your question? How can
my
we,
question, yeah,
how
my
can we have
question
more
is,
Bucky Fullers in the world?
yeah, my question is, it seems there's so many great ideas, but how make it accessible to young people or to the people who are interested? Actually, you mentioned about the best education is, there's so many resources. Actually, I see the potential with Shirkan here. Maybe we can create this whole learning structure and all the information people need to learn. And if they want to learn, and I can point to my kids to, learn about this. So they can actually self-guide to learn all these great things, they'll be more accessible to everyone. It's so wonderful, but it's so hard to find this information.
Well, you got to put learning groups together as part of the secret. And, the best design happens with a team. So you got to put teams together. What they use the word cohort now, which is an improvement to typical academic education. There's cohorts that are formed. I know I heard that word more and more used. But once again, it's asking the question, what is it that I want to create? And let that drive you. And you can hack higher education like never before with the internet, and find your teachers. That's really the other subtext of the film Ecological Design. We were searching for our teachers. I was 35 years old when I made that, gone through graduate school and all the other aspects of American culture, but I didn't really have that many real teachers. So we were on a search for our teachers or our mentors. And Bucky, of course, opened up a lot of those doors, because the idea of a design science explorer, emphasis on explorer and learning to follow your curiosity, and making a film opens those kind of doors. So ask your kids, what kind of film would they like to make if they could do it? And put a team together and organize the research like you're in graduate school, and make a list of questions that excite you. And if you know the answer, then it's not a quest. The idea is to go on a quest, like King Arthur and the Round Table, and Sir Lancelot. And so the mythic quest as well, which is really getting into finding your genius, what it is you're here to do. How many people teach that? Krishnamurti talked about that. Maybe you have to go to the East to find those kind of questions. One of my mentors, Robert Fritz, teaches that. But that's what really works, and that's how you can cut through all the bureaucracy of higher education and the big fees that they'll charge you and put you in debt. And as we know, debt is a tool of control that has a big history to it. CJ was onto that story. Debt in the empire. And that's unfortunately what happens to a lot of our students when they stop asking questions. So
thank you.
That's a quick answer.
Thank you. Next up is going to be John, followed by Paul. John.
Hi, yeah, I love the idea of a quest, but still and also discovery and edge education.
Right.
And I'm wondering about, it's partly about the idea of uncertainty or certainty. People really want certainty. And so having something that you're going to, like the Holy Grail, there's a certain certainty to that. Maybe not sure what it is, where it is or anything, but and the discovery, you're going to discover something. So there's a degree of certainty there. I'm wondering what you think of, I like your idea of explore, because it's not quite, you don't really know what you're going to find. Want to know your perspective on the value of an idea of an adventure. So you have no idea where you're going to end up, what you're going to discover. You just want to do it for fun, explore something for fun. Do you see adventure being similar to a similar value as having a quest?
Well, yeah, that's of course hero's journey. The call for adventure to adventure is the first aspect of it. So yeah, you got to respond to the call for adventure. As Helen Keller said, life is either an adventure or it's nothing. So you got to be on that path. And then of course, the other aspect of all this is the entrepreneur has a tolerance for ambiguity. So you got to let go of certainty and get into the power of the unknown. Because if there's no unknown, we'd all shrivel up with boredom. So the unknown is part of what's driving us. And if there's something out there and there's someone we need to meet, There's some connection we need to make. And we all should be on that kind of journey. And we can do it now like never before with the internet to some extent. But you also got to go out and meet people beyond the internet. So find your mentors and trust the, that's another Bucky, trust the universe to provide. And if you're serving the universe, she will serve you. That's kind of a metaphysical belief that he had that I kind of picked up on. And it's not always the case, but more often than not, it is. So it's back to this idea of serving a power higher than yourself, which I think it's really is others taught it's serving life, really serving the life process. And so see where that takes you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is going to be Paul. Paul S. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks everyone. Thanks for the wonderful clips and presentation, Christopher. I'd like to zero in quickly on art, and your quick point that you think art schools might partially have it right, and I have a personal connection with this mainly because my daughter just graduated from RISD with the master's there just a year ago, and I was very excited she got in, and I was very excited she went there, and in the end, I'd say both I and she felt a little disappointed, and I'm still processing with her the experience. Great people, great, passionate people, interesting people, but partially I think, and here's what I want your comment on, that we can't blame the schools in particularly only because they're trying to deliver a product to make a person fit, even with making an income into the current society. And what that wants to consume is what they're teaching. So it's a bigger problem than just the school. And do you think there are art schools that have solved it? Because the artist has the dilemma the most of all. Because you can't make a decent money for if you're an artist, is the joke. So there's my thoughts. Please help and give us your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if there's one design school. I think you have to hack higher education and find your teachers and come up with an original stew, an original mix. And so that's the responsibility of the student to light their own fire. And I agree, you can't expect even a school like RISD to do it for you. It can just expose you to the body of knowledge that has been organized, and maybe give you a sense that there is a journey that you need to go on. And you meet people like Bucky Fuller, you find out that the journey does lead to some kind of prosperity. But we have something called Google now, so we can find teachers like never before. But once again, it's the question, where is the best design school? I don't know. I think it's in your head, right? Where are the best teachers? Well, it depends on what question you're answering or asking. And they will show up. It's the old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will show up. So, especially when you're young, that's the time to go on those journeys like never before. And so facilitate their travel, I would say. Places like San Francisco are still centers of innovation. Thankfully, they still exist. And every school has a kernel of inspiration if you look for it. But I don't know, design schools need to be reinvented. That's for sure. And RISD is one of the best. Peter Dean's there, he was involved with Fuller's work. So there are some people there that you can put on a list, but maybe make a list of all the great design and find out who they learn from. And then, develop your own curriculum. In fact, in Design Outlaws, we published a epilogue on a design curriculum for the 21st century. So maybe that's the question now. What's the design curriculum for 2023? And see what comes out of that. And as Plenty Fist talks about, it's learning in 360. You're learning from everybody, even on what not to do. So that's back to this learning society metaphor. There was a book by the guy from Chicago, Hutchins, I think, on the learning society. And that was the ideal. And I think we have more ability to bring that forth now than ever before. And the fifth discipline, as I quoted from before, Peter Senge's work is formidable in terms of making a learning organization is what you want to hang out with. And don't put up with anything less, which becomes scripted. When you're in the script, you know it, and it's no fun. So maybe that's back to the form follows fun too, right? So if you're not having fun, maybe it's time to shift your perspective somehow. And so anyway, there's my thoughts on that.
So, Christopher, that's amazing. Everything that you've been saying, you know, with CJ, we launched this project of collaborating for comprehensivity.
Right.
And really, I mean, it really comes back to individuals, like Bucky saying at the age of 32, that I am going to learn what is from my own experience. I'm an experiment. I want to see what I can do, and let's see what I can do.
Right.
And that independence, if you have that, I'm not saying it's easy. It is actually quite hard.
It is hard, yeah.
But if you don't, if it's not really about other people, I mean, if you look at the world that we are living in, right? You're talking about the internet and technology, the fact that we are having this conversation. I mean, how amazing is that? You know, how miraculous is that? You know, it's like to be able to have this conversation with these people.
Yeah,
it's incredible. So, but I think that you really need yourself, each of us needs to have that within us. If we have that, if we don't have that, if we look for that outside, just doesn't work. Because nobody can give you, as you're rightly saying, nobody can give you the spark. You know, that spark is to come from within you. And if you have the spark within you, then the ease of actually finding other sparks so you can start a fire is so much more than it ever was. And so I really like, I mean, this is a theme that I see throughout everything that you have talked about, of just kind of authentically learning, authentically trying to do things which are the best thing that you can imagine, and then being open to collaboration and working with things as, you know, with synergy, because people will see that, see what you're doing, and will be attracted to that, and you'll find, you know, each of us will find ways of collaborating, and it's quite magical, actually. I mean, for
yeah, I would say it's more than being open to collaboration. You have to become a radical collaborator.
Yes.
And seek collaborators to join you, and they will show up. You might want to play that clip called "The Key Question."
Yes, let's do that.
And a
Let
good
me go ahead
example.
and do that. Give me just a second.
But these are all good questions.
Let me go.
There it is in film terms.
Here. Go back.
Just put it in key question.
Key question. Give me a second. Let's try key
space. There it is.
Yes.
So this is really the question that shaped
11,500 people that used to suffer from joint
film.
pain are throwing their pills in the garbage and living life.
Can we invent a more comprehensive way of designing, which will integrate the built world with our larger ecosystem, the biosphere? Can we find a way of life which will create a harmony between nature, technology, and humanity?
So I almost forgot, that was the key question. Can we develop a way of life that'll integrate nature, technology, and humanity? Can we develop a way of designing that will integrate nature, technology, and humanity? That was the key question that drove that film. That was right there in the beginning. There were a number of key questions, but there it is in a nutshell.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Kirby. Kirby, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is just in the general notion of films and films that are about Bucky or mention Bucky. You've got a bunch here of clips that the stuff you've done, and I wondered out there, like I'm going to mention two films and quickly say a word or two about them, but I was going to invite you to say if there's any films out there that, like, if you were advising someone to watch this or that, like, okay, the two films I'm thinking of, there's a commercial film called The House of Tomorrow, right? And it's based on a book, and it's about a grandmother who's raising her young guy, her ward, like the parents died in an accident, so she's in charge of this guy, this growing man. He's a young man, like high school or something, and she wants him to be the next Bucky, like literally. She's like trying to school him to be the next Bucky. It's a very interesting film, and it's set somewhat in the past, and the boy's getting really into punk music, and his grandmother doesn't like that. It's like it's disrupting her plan or whatever. So there's that film, which I thought was interesting. And I think a lot of people who are into Bucky like it, but I think some don't. And the other one was a documentary on PBS that came out, I guess, in the 90s by now, called Thinking Out Loud, which was, that was a big hit, and that it was on PBS nationally. I remember a lot of this Bucky fans calling each other and, getting the popcorn, and we're going to watch this, amazing movie. And it was pretty good, but it was also kind of sad. I always call it maudlin. Like, it has sad music, and it's like, poor Bucky, poor failure. And this seems to be the attitude I come across all the time with Bucky. It's like the violins come out, and it's like he tried to save humanity, but oh well, nice try. So I wondered, do you have other films that you want to talk about as outside your own work, which of course is what we're here to talk about too, but I wonder, as a filmmaker, what do you admire that you've seen out there, or don't admire? What do you think's a bad Bucky movie? Stuff like that.
Well, I don't want to talk about bad Bucky movies. I think any movie that includes Bucky is probably worth checking out. Has anybody really told the story? There was a film, I think it was called The Voyage of Intuition. I think went into it pretty deeply. But the definitive story, I guess, hasn't been told yet. That's a good question. I know we had some good theater that was done on Bucky's life. Mr. Jacobs, right?
Yes.
So we need more of that. Was there a good film related to Bucky? A very good question. I think that's an open frontier.
I'll just throw in as a final comment. I watched Avatar 2, and I watched Avatar, and then 10 years later, Avatar 2.
Right.
But the bad guys in that movie, who are coming from Earth, they're basically us, and we're pretty nasty. But our spaceship has these giant Bucky balls on it. I mean, if you're into Bucky, that's what you call them. They look like ping pong balls, but they're all triangulated. So I was like, ooh, that's gonna hurt, we're part of the bad guy world now. And actually that is true. I want to say the Bucky ball as a giant, ball has become a sign. It was very positive during the 67 World's Fair. It was the pavilion and all that. But now when you see something big like a Bucky ball, it's ominous. And it's like Menwith Hill in England. It's the NSA. It's the national security state. It's somehow the Bucky stuff can go either way. In a way, you can nudge it a little bit and it becomes downright sinister in some ways. And people had this fear about Bucky too, I think, even during the time, that he was too much of a technocrat, cold warrior. I don't see him that way, but I understand how some people could. And I think if I were going to make negative propaganda about Bucky, I sometimes think about how I would do that, because that just helps me flesh out my views, right? It's like if I want to do anti-Bucky, that will help me refine how I would defend him also, whatever. It's just a fun mind game, I guess.
Well, two films just came to me while you were talking. One is there's a new film on Stuart Brand called The Many Lives of Stuart Brand. There's somebody who's living an epic life influenced by Bucky. That's worth seeing. And then another one, there's a documentary on Norman Foster, the architect, who was influenced by Bucky. And he's a knight, Sir Norman Foster. He's done 2 or 3 buildings in Philadelphia and around the world, Masdar City. So there's an example of somebody influenced by Bucky's.
Right. He even rebuilt Bucky's car. Thank you. Those are good suggestions. Thank you very much.
That's what came to mind.
Yeah.
It's really more about where Bucky's ideas have gone and found new forms. I think is what we're looking for now.
Thank you. Great questions, Kirby, and glad to know about these. Looking forward to checking them out. Next up is Kurt, followed by Joe. Kurt.
Well, hey, thanks, Chris, so much for all your work. For all those years, I used the books and the DVDs decades ago in a book about Bucky and design. And I love it because, it's a little bit larger frame, right? That it wasn't just Bucky, it was John Todd, it was, this, it was that, it was the next thing. So I really appreciate it. And to Paul's question, Leonard Gable, who you probably know, who worked with Bucky on the World Game and now has the Global Solutions Lab and does this every summer, puts teams together to solve the big things.
Right.
What he would say, Paul, is the difference between design, in general, is that it's considered value free, which is I can design good stuff for bad guys or bad stuff for good guys or whatever, but comprehensive anticipatory design science is to design for living REIT, for the betterment of humanity and the living systems around us. So that's the thing. It's got this bias. So then, still kind of speaking to Paul, where do we find that nowadays? I do find John Thackeray's work a little bit older now, the book In the Bubble, pretty inspirational. And one of the reasons is he gets into social innovations, which at the time the book was written, were just starting out, but now it's a pretty big deal. And I would say if your daughter is interested in doing something, heading towards social innovation means that it has at least a focus on people and making things better for people. There's a lot of stuff now on social innovation. There's stuff out of Stanford. There's actually a whole Harvard Business Review, I don't know what institute or magazine or something on it. There's tons and tons of stuff. So I think that's really good. And so just once again, wrapping it up, really excited to see where you're going. with this, Chris, and the idea of living the question and, following your passion as opposed to, taking a degree, which, very good point, they want you to come out with something that fits into a corporate system. And frankly, like Bucky said, we got to create new models now, right? That's where we're at. And so maybe not fitting into the system, but making something viable. So sorry, I'm a bit of a ramble here, but I was really pleased to see you tonight.
Well, that's the Heideggerian approach of asking the transformational question. So we get beyond the chatter of life, which of course social media is mostly about. So no matter what you're doing, there is a transformational question that cuts to the core. And when you get that question, then you've got an open path. So what is that question? And you can, the question really is at any one time, what is it that I want to create? What excites me enough that if I can bring that forth, I'll be more energized. And so no matter what field you're in, you can always get down to a couple key questions. And if you have the audacity to ask those and find others who are also asking those, the journey will get more dynamic. And so Heidegger was right on that. And in fact, if we have time for another clip, there is something that goes into Heidegger a little bit.
Sure, let's do that. Give me just a second.
Because he was right about being and nothingness, of course, came after him.
What shall I look for?
Put the keyword Einstein in there.
This one?
No, design and time. Put that in there.
Let's do time.
Time and design. There it is, right there.
You can iron your clothes using an ice cube. Here's how. No, it's not a steamer, it's ice.
Einstein comes along, he's working as a tax accountant or something in Zurich, and everybody's talking, wow, you're early, you're late. Everybody's talking about time, clocks are time. And then he's trying to say to himself, well, everybody talks about time, but what is time? It's a simple, fundamental question. I always tell students, go back to the dumbest idea you could possibly think of, and that's the one no one's exploring. Because they think, oh, well, everybody knows that. Well, I'm sure everybody thought they knew what time was till Einstein came along, and then obviously, very much like a deconstructivist, he broke through the whole idea. He just tore it apart. He just inverted and changed the entire concept of what time is. So I think that that's the kind of thinking you always admire and are trying to get people moving towards. They've got to move towards something. And designers are no different. If you can think of another definition of design or another parameter, another expansion of it, you're doing your job. Usually the most interesting art of any kind, in almost any form, is hybrid.
Well, I was wrong. That didn't include Heidegger, but there is a cut from that film that includes Heidegger, who I think is the philosopher of the 20th century we all need to be in touch with. And I know Werner Erhard, the controversial founder of S, was very much into Heidegger as well. And so
thank
there's
you.
another path.
Thank you. Next up is Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Hey, Chris. This is actually kind of building on Kirby's question. Is that there was this one documentary talked about going circular. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. And it talks about essentially regenerative economics. And it has essentially the work that somebody named John Bulletin is doing in this particular area that's really focused on building business cases that actually work on making sustainable solutions across the economy. Now, you said something that was interesting a little bit earlier You said the time has come for regenerative economics. Why do you believe that? And to that debate, and are you familiar with that documentary or John Fullerton's work? And if you wanted
I
to
know
comment
John
on that.
Fullerton's work in the Capital Institute. He was influenced by Hazel Henderson. Well, regenerative is the graduation from the word sustainability, which is not motivating enough. You know, it's the old joke, how's your marriage? Well, it's sustainable. No, that's not enough. So regenerative is actually a very old word used in a number of fields. The arts ultimately are about regenerative design. Now we have Paul Hawken with a new book out on regeneration. So it's an update of the sustainability paradigm, and regenerative economics certainly sounds more exciting than sustainable economics. I think it's something that we're inventing right now. And so, you know, Paul Hawken's book is a good place to start to get some ideas on that. And the approach, of course, related to climate change is that rather than getting in an argument with people of whether it exists, to start presenting solutions to what will make life more regenerative, and that draws people in. So I think we're on that voyage right now. Bucky talked about regenerative universe, so we're kind of living in that context right now. Fullerton turns it into an economic program, which is probably worth checking out. I know he's teaching courses on that. So I think it's a paradigm with a future. And so, yeah, definitely chase it down. There's a couple films out there I saw as well. Jeff Bridges narrates one of them on regeneration. They use the word regenerosity now. I see at the Fuller Institute. So that's, I think, the cutting edge right now, that everybody here can come up with their own definition of it. That's part of it. It's not been sealed. It's not a conventional economics approach. And what is regenerative? What brings life? That is, serves life, brings you to life. So music obviously is part of that too. And so is gastronomy. So I think it opens up the space a lot more than sustainability did. So I think it's a good framing.
Thank you. Thank you, Christopher. Christopher, this has been an honor. This is a great presentation. I just love everything that you said. Everybody, thank you for your comments and questions. I want to tell you what's coming up for the Bucky series. On the 12th, we're going to do lightning round. Everybody, regardless of whether you know Bucky for 30 years or you're just finding out about Bucky, you're welcome to talk for 5 minutes on anything related to Bucky. We want a lot of cross fertilization of ideas. So it is Kirby's idea to call it lightning round. So I think lightning round is perfect. So that's what we're going to do. On 19th, we're going to have Kurt. Kurt is going to be here every month presenting one chapter of his book. So next month is going to, on 19th of March is going to be the first chapter. I think it is about tuning, if I remember right. Kurt, if you're here, you're welcome to talk a little bit about it. Let me go ahead and run through everything else. And if you want, you're welcome to talk about what you'll be doing. Next up on 26th, Richard is going to be here, and he's going to be talking about social tensegrity. On the 2nd of April, Rupali is going to be here. She's going to be talking about Montessori, Buckminster Fuller, and education. How can what are the commonalities between the Maria Montessori's thought and Buckminster Fuller's thought on education? That's what she's going to be talking about. But before that, I'm going to go to Doug. Doug, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I saw your film, the design film. I think it was at the Reuben H. Fleet's Space Museum in San Diego.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
when I was just, pardon?
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, it showed there, and I may have met you at that time. I was working with Peter Meisen on the Centennial, and he may have invited me to, I don't know, there was so much going on around that time, and it's a really good film. And I have to say, that's when I was getting the idea to write the play, and it's one of the many signs I got that this is important and I need to focus on it. I think it's one of the better films out there on these design issues. So thank you for your work on that.
All right, well, thanks for being influenced. I saw your theater show in Washington, DC.
Oh, in DC, yeah.
Yes.
Great,
So
cool.
you brought Bucky to life in a three-dimensional way.
Yeah, I may be bringing that back to Los Angeles at the end of this year, so I'll let
Right on.
people know if that happens.
Well, do it for the upcoming generations. That's the challenge, because Bucky is not in universities.
No, well, yeah, Kirby talks about that a lot.
He was
The
too
important stuff is not
cross-disciplinary.
in the. I'm sorry, go ahead.
He was too cross-disciplinary. Universities are still very much based on disciplines. And so,
Well, I and every other student went to Cal Arts because it said it was interdisciplinary, but a lot of the teachers really want to teach their turf and they don't really want to go into the interdisciplinary work. And they have a reputation for being interdisciplinary, but there is this huge resistance to actually going there, other than Alexander McKendrick, the great British Scottish film director who really was interdisciplinary. And
well, we need to make a list of who those people were so a curriculum can be developed. Who was really pushing the boundaries of interdisciplinary thought and design.
Cal Arts didn't know what to do with him, so they gave him a department of his own. He was so interdisciplinary.
Really?
There was sort of a mix of theater and film, but he'd quote Freud and Jung, and and he came out of the advertising world, but he taught Aristotle better than anyone.
Right. Well, that's the kind of people we need. That's for sure. Cal Arts outside of LA, right?
Yeah, north of LA.
Right. With a Disney.
The students were all interdisciplinary. That's why they went there. They were all interdisciplinary.
Right.
Which was the important thing, I think.
Well, that's
Hopefully
a good
the
question.
students
How do we
learn-
learn from that?
Pardon?
How do we learn from Cal Arts in its glory days?
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
good-
there's still interesting work there. I do have one recommendation, Shrikant. I've been spending a week with Benjamin Lauder, who runs the Fuller Dome, and I mentioned this group, and he's going to watch, my program because it dovetails into one I saw him give at the World Philosophical, I can't remember, Research Society, the Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles, and it's a speech that he's given a number of times at the Fuller Festival about how he built his house out of recycled materials. And it's an amazing lecture, and he's actually interested in jumping into the lineup at some point.
Oh, I would love to have him here. Just go ahead and introduce us.
Yeah.
I'm also going to send you this video because you came in late, so it's
that'd be great.
And I will send Christopher your video because he will want to see that as well. And I will connect up Christopher with Richard, who really wants to look at that paper that which Christopher talked about. So thank you very much, folks. This is so amazing. Just great group of people and just great cross-fertilization of ideas. And let's see what we can do together. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you for showing up. Yes.
Thank you. Christopher, would you like to have any last words?
Well, I guess it's all about learning how to learn and following the call to adventure every day, that we have a chance to breathe and invent. And of course, finding the others as one psychonaut talked about back in the 60s, is part of the challenge. And I am impressed with this Zoom medium for what you've been able to do with it. And Bucky certainly left us a framework that we can keep exploring for hundreds of years, because there is so much work to be done. And of course, the 17 sustainable goals that the UN is talking about, that's the challenge of our time right now. And so let's find a way to contribute at that level too, because the UN is in need of help, as most institutions are. So really, design is about regeneration, and we have to become a force of regeneration in order to break the dominant paradigm, which isn't working. So
Thank you. Thank you,
enough said on
Christopher.
that.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Bye.
Okay,
Good night,
thank you.
everyone.
Bye.